Oen zijn akimon en mooi daour. Het is een jazz van persoon die was een full entourage of ze roi behoort. Clipperboard stak under their arms like they were staurmink e kaurtrum. They didn't even bother with small talk. The president, a sharp-nosed woman with sunglasses too big for her face, pointed down toward the lake and barked. The dog that yesn't belonged to you. It's Sedgeway property, and you're here to remove it. I nearly lived. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of their confidence was almost impressive. They ain't asking, they were звездочка telling звездочка. I let them rant about by laws and community standards, watching their faces graded visage of retail sort. Finally, when they paused long enough to catch a breath, I slid a manila folder across my porch railing and said, "You might want to read this before you bring a chainsaw." The president snatched it up like she was ready to prove me wrong on the spot. But as furiously kicked over the dit and said, "Horse moek ich pression faltered." One of the other board members leaned in, squinting at the legalise, then whispered something that made the rest of the room go pally. The silence was so heavy you could hear the waves lapping against the dock. See, the dock isn't just mine too. When I bought this land years ago, I didn't just purchase the shredding about the outright. Every inlet, every channel, every single narrow stretch in this county. The entire lake system was mine, on paper and in law. If you wanted to fish, boat, or even dip a toe in, technically, you were on my property. You were got to be joking. One of the Aram finally muttered. I leaned against the porch post and smiled. I don't joke about deeds, easements, or riparian rights. If you'd done your homework, you'd know every duck in this neighborhood. Звездочка, including your звездочка, sits on my outruis. Which means, if you're really playing by the rules, you all mirentui. Their faces were priceless. Some sputtered, others stared at me like it grown horns. But I wasn't done. I pulled out a second document, thicker this time, and laid it down. This here is a record of every violation звездочка Юве, звездочка committed against звездочками звездочки your ducks. Unauthorized structures, your boats, unlicensed use. Every 4th of July fireworks show you were shot over this lake. Tested. The president tried to recover her footing, but her was cricket as she said. Через новый this holds up in court. I shrugged. You're welcome to TRY. But judges tend to like things like titles and deeds. And if we got those in spades, that was the first time it ever seen an HOA retreat. They didn't storm out with bravado. They shoveled Rui, whispering furiously among themselves, already calculating how deep they were in. And I stood there watching them, knowing this was only the beginning. Because if they wanted war, they had no idea the battlefield already belonged there to me. A week later, the first shot came not from me, but from Teram. A thick envelope slid into my mailbox, packed with on vines and diamonds. They were trying to bury me in paperwork, drawing me under legal jargon. I smiled as I read it, because they still didn't understand. Every single letter they sent only dug their hole deeper. I called a meeting of my own not on their tour, but on mine. Down at the dock, with the water glistening like a mirror, I invited every homeowner who relied on these lakes for their property value. Fishermen, boaters, families who swim here every summer, they all came. I stood at the edge of the dock and held up the same deed that had routed the HOA. This water, it's mine, which means it sells yours if you're with me. But if the HOA keeps pushing, I have every right to revoke access. No fishing, no boating, no swimming. You want that? Or do you want to start playing this game on звездочка our звездочка terms? A murmur rolled through the crowd. People exchanged their glances, whispered, then did. And just like that, the HOA isn't facing one man, they were facing an entire community, and if it under the person they thought they could intimidate. And when North reached the county office, when they pulled the same records I had, the realization hit everyone like a thunderclap. The HOA didn't just pick the wrong fight. They picked a fight against the one man who literally controls the lifeblood of their neighborhood. That was when things truly started to unravel, because once power sleeps, disparity takes its place. And disparity people, especially ones with clipboards and a false sense of authority, tend to make dangerous moves. The HOA didn't think real quietly after that exit meeting. And no day doubled down. A few nights later, I noticed rocks creeping through the neighborhood, howling lies under the cover of darkness. At first glance, it looked like routine landscaping gear, but then I saw the lumber, the cement mixers, the unmarked boxes stacked high. They ran just fixing up a garden or pushing fences. They were plotting something bigger, or spread fast. Neighbor started whispering that they planned to build a community pier. A massive structure that would over my dock, turning it into a side node. But it is a kicker. They wanted to construct IT on the very same route they now know I controlled. IT was brazen, almost a micro, like trying to build a house on someone else's land and hoping no one noticed. I let them keep working for a while, watching from a distance. The sound of hammers and drills carried across the lake, their shadows dancing under portable floodlights. They thought speed would save them, that if they finish it quickly enough, it have no choice but to accept IT. But what they didn't realize was that every nail they drove in only became more evidence in MY arsenal. Meanwhile, MY neighbors they once hot side did with me started to rally. They brought over to MY porch, copies of old maps, even family records of fishing rights that trace back generations. It isn't just about me anymore. It was about the whole Sauntus heritage. Those who outreach ran just recreational spots they were the veins that carried history, commerce, even livelihoods. And the HOA, blinded by control, was stamping all over IT. Then came the current inspector. He pulled up one morning in a dusty sedan, clipboard in hand, tire rescue. The man looked up and down, like it been dragged into 100 potty disputes before mine. Got a complaint about an outright construction, he said, flipping through it is no days. I did but hiding MY green. Glad you came. You're going to want to bring a bigger clipboard too. We walked down to the elbowed monstrosity the HOA was erecting. He raised his eyebrows as soon as he saw a giant pillings driven into the lake beam stretching out like the skeleton of a wooden leviathan. Workers froze meeting, hems dangling, as darting toward me like it exceeds the law and term personally. The inspector scribbled furiously, muttering under his breath about permits, environmental codes, Sharelini setbacks. The HOA president Erpertien, stamping down the hill in her pristine tennis shoes, trying to look unshaken. This is a sanctioned community project, she declared, hands on her hips. The inspector looked up from his clipboard, did a pen. Sanctioned by who? She faltered. By the association. By asked it. That's funny, he said, flipping another page. Because last I checked, your association doesn't have jurisdiction over county outreach. And according to the deeds, he jeered at me, he digested. The silence was delicious. I could feel the workers, as on her, on me, on the inspector. For the first time, the whole solution of power cricket in public view. But they didn't quit. Not even 10. That night, MY followed up with messages from neighbors, whispers of secret meetings at the clubhouse, discussions about emergency law changes, and talk of hiring outside lawyers. They weren't just trying to win, they were trying to rewrite the rules of the game. And so, I played my next card. A week later, I filed my own injunction. Not just against their peer, but against every unauthorized structure on the water. Every dock, every rift, every buoy. IT was a bold move, and yes, IT rooted some of the same neighbors who cheered for me earlier. But I explained IT clearly. This is about punishing term, it was about drawing a line in the sand. The HOA had to weaponize this outreach. The only way to level the field was to bring everything into question. The courtroom battle began like a storm breaking over the horizon. Their lawyers arrived there in slick suites, briefcases clicking, voices smooth and confident. And while Laura and old friend with a reputation for dismantling arrogance arrived there in scuffed boots and a grin that could cut glass. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched low on corners, listening as arguments flew back and forward. The HOA painted me as a tyrant howarding Chrysayurtses, a selfish man who wanted to choke out the entire community for personal gain. MY Laur, in contrast, laid out the history they did, the transfers of ownership, the community records that no one had bothered to check until now. He even pulled out grainy Blachkan-Hitty photos of steamboats from a century ago, showing MY land as the hub of the whole region. And when he drops the final piece of evidence a map sign BY the state itself, outlining MY reparian rights the courtroom silent except for the Jurgis pen scratching across her pad. The ruling didn't come immediately, but the tension afterward was electric. The railway board looked shaken. Their president glaring daggers at me like she could will the documents out of existence. Meanwhile, I walked out of the courtroom feeling the tide had shifted. But battles like this don't end with gewils. They end in Ekbergades, on the doorsteps across dinner tables. And sure enough, the whole smear campaign began almost overnight. Flyers popped up in mailboxes, painting me as a land baron, strangling the caermunity. At the grocery store, whispers trailed behind me. Some new bearers wydite contact, while Otto's quietly squeezed my shoulder in solidarity. Still, I didn't back down. I organized Lakes Leanup days, invited families to fish over my dock, and appended the outreach for caermunity events so long as people understood it was under my permission, not the horse. It wasn't about fleeing control. It was about proving who truly cared for this place. And as I stood on the dock one summer evening, watching kids splash in the shallows and parents laughing from lawn chairs, I realized something they really never could. Authority doesn't come from clipboards and vines. It comes from respect, from trust, from knowing you're fighting for more 10 years of. Which is exactly why, when the HOA made their next move, the one that would check the entire community was ready. IT started with rumors of a backroom deal, whispers that the HOA had reached out to developers, offering up access rights to the lake in exchange for a massive payout. Condos, marinas, restaurants all built on land and to outer that aren't chairs to sell. They were gambling everything on one disparity hint, and they thought no one would notice until it was too late. But I noticed. And when I uncovered the paperwork they signed agreements, the kickbacks promised under the table and the fight was about to escalate beyond anything the community had ever seen. The deal they tried to make was bold, reckless, and dripping with greed. The HOA president and four board had signed our own agreements with developers from out of state, promising term control of the lake in exchange for a cash windfall and promises of progress too. Condos stacked like glass showy bogies. Marinas full of speedboats. Restaurants were familiar with who owns fish. They wanted to erase everything the community had built, all for their own payout. When I held the papers in my hands, the contracts, the signatures, the proof I felt that same Roshit felt standing on my dock weeks earlier when I told them the water was mine. But this isn't just about me anymore. They aren't just trying to check my dock. They had tried to sell the heart of the community, like it was theirs to trade. I didn't keep it quiet. I wanted every soul in that neighborhood, every fisherman, every child who had learned to swim in that lake, every elder whose family had passed down stories of this outreach to see the truth. So I called another gathering. Not on the dock this time, but in the community courthouse auditorium, a place where every seat could be filled, where the weight of history could press down from the open-lit walls and in the rafters. The room was packed. Families, workers, even people from towns farther out who relied on the lake system for trade and recreation. The railway board sat stiff in the front row, their loud beside them, whispering frantically in their ears. And when I stepped onto that stage, holding up those contracts for all to see, a hush fell so heavy it was like the air itself had frozen. "Here it is," I said. "Prove that the HOA has been negotiating behind your backs. Prove that they tried to sell what they isn't belong to them. They didn't just come for my dock. They came for звездочки of tourist звезд." The murmurs began immediately, like thunder roaring across the crowd. People stood up, shouting, demanding answers. The HOA president tried to speak, tried to wave her hands and insist that it was all for the good of the community too. But the crowd wasn't buying it. 4 years. She swallowed her rules, her fines, her smoke lectures. But nowadays who her for what she was a man who thought power was hers to Howard, who thought money could have right heritage. That night was the breaking point. The county commissioner herself came forward, promising an emergency session to review the whole authority. By morning, news outlets had picked up the story. Headlines painted the HOA as villains. My phone lit up with reporters asking for comment. And for once, the whole county, not just my neighbors, was watching. What came next was a storm that swept the HOA out of its feet. Investigations penetrated into their finances. Audits uncovered years of shady bookkeeping, Vines collected and misused. Funds that required vanished into administrative kasten. Members who had once stood proudly beside the president began reasoning one by one, unwilling to go down with her sinking ship. By the time the state attorney general's office got involved with the that way wasn't just disliked. It was finished. But the real moment the one that made everything worth it came on a clear, crisp morning at the lake. The community had gathered again, not in anger this time, but in celebration. Children raced across the shore, their laughter carrying over the water. Old fishermen cast their lines from boats that bobbed gently in the sunlight. Families set up grills and picnic tables. Music played from portable speakers. And for the first time in years, people ain't looking over their shoulders for vines or stasson. They asked me to speak. And as I stood there, the lake stretching white and gleaming behind me, I realized the story wasn't about me being clever now toward men of the age way. It was about people remembering what was there so long. I didn't do any this fight alone, I said. They wrote out these waters were just property. Something to measure, to sell, to control. But here more than that. Here history. Here heritage. Here the soul of this community. And they belong to all of us too. RPLO's lowered enough to shade the trees. But it isn't the kind of RPLOs you give to a politician or a hero. It was relief. It was freedom. It was the sound of chains filing Rui. That way was dissolved officially weeks later. Their bylaws, their fines, their claims so null and void. The president herself faced charges for fraud and misappropriation of funds. She won from strutting through the neighborhood with sunglasses and clipboards to quietly picking up her home, living in the middle of the night like a fugitive. And me, I didn't hoard the victory. I worked with the community to establish a trust, putting the outreach into a permanent protection fund. No AVA, no developer, no greedy boat could ever tear to sell it again. Access was granted to the community forever, managed by a council of locals who understood what the lake meant. Here is a power in land, in water, in the things that ties to a place. But here is a great power in people standing together, remembering that no piece of paper, no self-appointed authority, can erase their bond toward their life. The HOA never understood that. They thought control came from fear. But real control, lasting control, comes from respect. And every time I walk down to a Moidak now, I see AT. Not just in the still water reflecting the sky, but in the way neighbors wave, in the way children shout across the lake, in the way old men tell stories about the time we took AT back to. A Moidak isn't just wood-nailed together anymore. It's a reminder, a symbol, proves that no matter how powerful someone seems, cheering never bigger than the truth. The HOA shot up demanding a Moidak, but in the end, what they lost was far greater. They lost the illusion of their power. They lost the trust of the people they were supposed to serve. They lost the war they didn't even understand they were fighting. And I didn't just keep a Moidak. I kept the outreach, the heart of this community, alive and untouchable. Forever. Because when you stand your ground, when you fight not just for yourself but for everyone who calls a place home, you don't just win. You change everything. They thought they controlled me. But in the end, I controlled the water, the land, and the legacy. And now, a will love 3-4 generations.